Hello everyone, and welcome to part 5 in this series on modeling and texture painting in Blender. And we're finally ready to start painting some of the detail on our model. So I think that we're going to start with the wrapping here around the handle because I think that will be the easiest part. First I'll just disable that background reference image so that we don't see it behind the model. And yeah, so we'll start here. Again, it's just, I think, a good way to ease into the painting by starting with one of the easiest parts. And I'll begin by zooming in both the viewport and the UV image editor, because we can paint in both, but we'll likely just be painting in the viewport mostly, at least for this part. And I'm turning on my face masking, and I can use C, which is the selection tool, to just select all of these lighter faces. I'm leaving the darker ones deselected or masked rather. And so to begin, we're going to be painting a little bit of the ambient occlusion and light shadows in, because even though this is a very jagged looking shape, it's still rounded. So we're going to make it look like it's rounded. So we're going to go to our draw brush first. And we're just going to start painting some really light shadows in to begin with. So we'll use S, which is the paint selection tool, to get that color back into our brush. And then I'll just darken it slightly and then change the blend type to multiply, because this will only use the darker values of that color. So we can take the strength down pretty low and take the size of the brush up a little with the F key. And I'm just going to paint around the border and the edge of this shape of the handle, getting the bottom as well to get that little ambient occlusion shadow where it meets that metal ring. And okay, so now that we've added this initial dark value in, I'd like to add more of that red in. So what I'm going to do is change my blend type to overlay, because overlay essentially does the same thing as multiply. It will darken that if you have a darker value. If you have a lighter value, it will lighten the value, but it puts the color in as well. So it will add that dark value shadow, but also include the red in with it. So it kind of makes some more contrast and makes it stand out a little. And probably the best analogy I can give for why we would need to do that is it's kind of like adding a vignette to a render. You know, by darkening those edges, you're making the center stand out more. All right, so now I'm going to lower the value of this color to make it darker. It'll make it sort of a dark brown. And I'll take the size of my brush down with the F key. And I'm going to start painting these lines in to distinguish the individual wraps around that handle. So I'll start by following this edge around the masked area all the way to the edge. And I'll go around to the bottom as well. And I'll do the same thing on this one. So with my tablet pen, I'm doing very short strokes because it's very hard to draw a straight line. Even, you know, the greatest artists in the world can't really draw a perfectly straight line. So we do these really short connecting lines. Okay, and on this one as well. Down the top and the bottom of that masked area, and then to the edge. You could also use the line selection in the stroke settings, but we'll use that later. But I actually want a more natural look. So I want it to be a little. I want it to be obvious that it was hand drawn and not perfectly straight. So I'll do another one here at kind of an angle. Okay, and I'll just touch up these other lines to make sure that they're all kind of equal in their value and appearance. All right, and maybe we'll put one more down here. This time we'll have it curving downward. Okay, now that we have these initial lines, we need to add a little bit of occlusion shadows in there. So the way that we can do that is I'll select a lighter value and a little bit of an orange color maybe. And I'll keep my brush at overlay for the blend type, but I'll increase the size a little bit with the F key. And now I'll just paint over these lines. Actually, maybe I'll lower that value a little, make it a bit darker. Okay, that looks pretty good. I don't want it to be as dark as the initial line, but I want there to be a little bit of a shadowed area in there, which will help to create the image of depth, or the illusion of depth, I should say, because there's no actual geometrical depth there. It's just faking it with painting the shadows in. And I said in one of the earlier parts, maybe the first part, I would talk a little bit about the differences between painting with a mouse and a tablet. And I don't really think we've reached a point yet where there are truly any real differences between painting with the mouse or the tablet. Whatever we're doing now can be done just as easily with a mouse. I think once we get into doing some fine detail work, then we're going to start discussing what the differences are and how you have to approach each one a little differently. Because things like, the pressure sensitivity on the tablet help to increase the workflow and how essentially how easy it is to paint. But again, we will discuss those things later. As for now, we're okay with just using the mouse or the tablet. Okay, now I'll switch to my smear brush, and I'm just going to increase the strength all the way up. And then around these darker edges, I'm just going to start dragging some of that dark color in towards the middle. And this will create little, the appearance of little wrinkles in the fabric. So on this narrow side, I'll kind of start from one point and drag them outward. And then on the wider part, I'll space them out a little more. And in this instance, you can make a lot of variation between their length and their intensity. So they don't always have to look the same. They can be very different because it's cloth and it's very organic, and it would naturally have a lot of variation in it. Okay, so if you don't like the appearance of something, you can use Control Z and just undo it. I felt like I maybe put too many in there, so okay, that's looking pretty good. Yeah, you definitely want to have a lot of variation in especially the length of those wrinkles. So don't make them all look too similar. Okay, just a few more and we'll be ready to move on. Okay. So now we want to put a little bit of light on this to make this look like it is indeed a rounded shaped object. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to select a bit of a lighter color, like a light orange or even yellowish tone, and stay on overlay. Just increase the brush size a little bit. I'm just going to lightly paint down the center of this object. Now I'm just raising the value more and adding a little more yellow, and then just painting straight down through the center. And that brightens it up nicely. And you can increase the brush strength here with the value slider, or you can use Shift F, which is the hotkey for increasing or lowering the strength. But I'm going to say at like a 0.2, around a 0.2, and then I'm going to lower the brush size with the F key. And now I'm going to zoom in and just paint a little highlight under each of these little wrinkles. So right underneath of each of these individual wrinkles, I'm just going to lightly paint a little bit of where the light might be catching one of those folds in the fabric. But I think I want these strokes to look a little softer, so I'll come down to my curve and I'll select this really pointy tab here. This curve will make the brush look a little soft around the edges, so it's perfect for painting these little fine detail highlights along little creases like this. Okay, and I'll kind of extend the edges that come more out into the light will be a bit brighter, and the ones that are more in the shadowed area won't be quite as defined or as bright. So this one comes way out into the center, so I'll have a really bright edge underneath of it. But this one will have a very light edge underneath of it. And some of you asked in the comments why I'm painting the light and shadow rather than letting the whichever render engine I choose do that work for me. This is really just a style. It's seen in a lot of video games and you know, a lot of people who present models on things like Sketchfab. It's really just an art style. You know, instead of allowing the render engine to do that work, you're painting it by hand. It's essentially no different than if you were doing a two-dimensional painting of a landscape. You're taking care of all of the lighting and shadows manually. And the reason that this is so important for game engines, again, is because usually those objects are made shadeless so that they're not calculating light, which makes your game more efficient, but also it's again, it's just more of a style. So I've gone in and changed to my smear brush, and I'm just going to soften up some of those lines and maybe add a few little additional light wrinkles in. But for the most part, it's looking pretty good. Anywhere where you see too much of that light, though, I'm just kind of smoothing it out along the edge of those wrinkles. Now I'll come back to my draw brush, and I'll add a little bit of green to that color. And now I'll just slowly dab some of that in down the center. And that's just to add a little bit of a complementary color or just a random different color to part of this. Because I think that if you keep anything too much of one value or color, then you're making it look too flat and boring. So putting in some different variations is pretty important. Okay, so now I'll lighten the color up even more to something closer to white. And I'll just lower the brush size with F and just highlight the tops of each of these wraps. So to make it look like they're maybe catching light themselves. Not just the individual wrinkles, but the actual wraparounds themselves are catching light at the top. But maybe also some of them maybe lower in their height. So maybe like this one, for instance, might be catching a little bit of a shadow from the one above. And all I've done is just lowered the value because overlay will either lighten or darken depending on where you have the value set. So on a couple of these, I'll just make it look like the wrap above it is casting a small shadow. But I think that's it. I think we're actually finished this part of it. I think we're going to move on to the wood in the next one, and then to the more complicated materials like the metal and so on. But one thing we're going to do before we go is we need to make sure that we save our progress. So we'll come down to the image and click image, and then save as image. And that's it. Thanks guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.